All right, let's go ahead and pray and we'll get started. Thanks for coming this morning. And so we are beginning a new, it was last month's book, but we're covering it but we'll always be about a book behind. And sometimes we'll spend more time on the book than others. It just sort of depends. But this book happens to all be about worldview. And since we started a series on worldview, I thought it'd be good to slow down. And so we're going to cover 2 chapters a week this month. So this week we're covering the first 2 chapters. Next week we'll cover the next 2 and so forth. So that's the way we're doing it. All right, so let me pray for us and we'll dive in. Father, thank you for Erwin Lutzer and his faithfulness to you over many years as a pastor and now speaking all over the world and continuing to write. And I just thank you for his sound theology and sound biblical teaching. And as we look at just how we can live as Christians in a very difficult culture where there's contrasting worldviews, but especially worldviews that are secular, that encroach on us and the church and culture, help us to know your word better and to be able to apply it in such a way that we would make a difference for good in this world and for your glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Okay, so we're looking at chapters 1 and 2 of We Will Not Be Silenced by Erwin Lutzer. And what I'll do each week as we're going through this is I'll be quoting things from the book and have some relevant scriptures. Usually, like this week, I happen to be using scriptures he brought in and then brought in some of my own that refer to these things. And we'll have enough time to ask questions and bring discussion on the reading as well. So in chapter 1, he asks the question he talks about how we got here. So the older you are, the more changes you've seen in America. Like, I'm glad my parents are in heaven and they haven't had to deal with all the garbage since in the last 6-7 years. They would have been mortified, I think. But again, we're like frogs in the kettle. We sort of just have to live in this reality that is so different than what we grew up with. And so the first chapter is helpful because he just talks about sort of how secularism has encroached in America on everything in the last 60, 70 years. And I think it's helpful. And what he addresses is something we've been talking about a lot. By the way, happy birthday. Is your birthday today?
Next week.
Oh, it's next weekend. Oh, okay.
Thank
Well, early happy birthday.
It's Shannon's birthday, Shannon Collins.
Oh, it is. Okay. Happy birthday.
Oh, that's what Dana said. So.
Okay.
Dana knows. I don't know.
All right. It's better to be early.
I tried to give him more room for his feet.
Better to be early wishing happy birthday than late.
Yes,
so
thank you.
You get extra birthday wishes. So in chapter 1, how we got here, and again, I'll just quote what he says here. He says, "The secular left does not believe that America can be fixed. They say it must be destroyed. Those who resist this utopian vision are to be vilified, bullied, and shamed until they admit to the mistakes of the past and embrace the secular left's great hope for the future. Take a moment to reflect on what has happened in America in the last 20 years. Consider the increasingly sexually explicit curriculum in our public schools. Listen to the racial rhetoric of the self-appointed social justice warriors who are committed to inflaming racial division. And look at the new laws forcing Christian colleges to compromise their biblical stance about marriage and surrender to the LGBTQ agenda." So, again, we see that. I don't think anybody would hear that and go, "Oh, I don't see that going on." I mean, this is something that we all know is going on. We feel the tension of this, and one thing I just want to say, it's really important as Christians that you have to understand that not everybody has been given grace and knowledge like you have. In other words, if you grow up in our culture and you're pro something that's anti-Christian, that's all you know. You know, if you don't go to church, if you don't have a Christian family, where are you going to get that? So you have to understand that a lot of people, this is just all they know. And so when you come from the outside of what they know and give what you know, their immediate response is to be defensive.
Yeah.
And just know that that's probably the way you would be too. Okay, so it's important. You know, again, I'm really big on truth, as you know, but I also pray for more and more grace for people who don't know what I know and haven't been exposed to what I know. And that's why it's important to have a dialogue and be patient with people. And living in Marin, when we get new people in our church, it's important that you understand that a lot of people have a very different worldview than you do. And they may even be outspoken about that, but we're trying to reach those people. Okay? So I just want to say it's easy to get together with other believers and talk about how bad the world is and how bad their views are of everything is and all that kind of stuff, give each other high fives and hug each other. But the reality is, until Jesus returns, these are the people God's called us to reach. So I like the fact that Lutzer points out what's going on, but he also constantly gets you back to the Bible and being a good witness and articulating truth in a gracious way. And so I think Lutzer is very helpful in that regard. But I just want you to know, we could, and on any given Sunday, we can have people that have very different values, very different beliefs than we do, and let's love them, let's be gracious with them, let's be patient with them, and let's interact and dialogue with them and try to influence them as best as we can. But again, if you were in their shoes, you would want somebody to be patient with you. So I just want to remind you of that because...
I still want somebody to be patient with me.
Yeah. That is quite the hat, Cordy, by the way. I mean, man alive, that is something. I don't think I could get away with wearing that hat.
Well,
At least I would hope not. But you wear it well. Okay. All right. Moving on. The next bullet point. Who would have ever believed the day would come when men would say that they too can bear children and menstruate and thus must fight for period equality? Or that drag queens would be allowed to read fairy tales to very young children in public libraries. This kind of sexualized thinking and behavior is spreading rapidly in a nation obsessed with its overblown emphasis on individual rights for a select few at the expense of others. Okay, to summarize, the late Dr. Haddon Robinson, who was a preaching professor at Gordon Conwell, said, in the past, we as American Christians always had home field advantage. We knew that in the crowd there were those from the other team who were opposed to us, but the larger stadium crowd was either on our side or indifferent to our witness as Christians. All that has changed. Now we play all our games on enemy turf. A minority is on our side while the wider culture sits in the stands shouting hateful epithets at us, rejoicing at our losses. And the elitists in the skyboxes cheer them on. Now, because of the recent election and there's a conservative resurgence right now. But again, it doesn't mean we could just let our guard down and just go, okay, we're back, we're back in the game. The reality is, people who hold to these things, like the transgender stuff and all, they're going to keep fighting tooth and nail on this stuff and trying to integrate it and save it and whatever. But I do think it's interesting that, and by the way, I say this a lot, but some of you may not be aware of Victor Davis Hanson.
Oh, yeah.
And you might get tired of me mentioning him, but he's the guy for me that has the best grasp from a Christian worldview and as a historian what's going on in culture. And so if you type in his name, Victor Davis Hanson, on YouTube, every day he's putting out material. And there's a lot of his lectures available, but here's a guy who's a world-class historian and really knows politics and government and history inside and out like probably very few people on the planet from a Judeo-Christian worldview perspective. And so the stuff we're talking about, if you want to know, like, how do I respond, how do I react to what's going on today in the policies that are being made today, he's addressing all those things right now. And he's very articulate, very smart, very wise. And amazingly, God has him at the Hoover Institute at Stanford, where he's surrounded by people who are unlike him. But he's very gracious in the way he interacts with them and interacts with policies and so forth. So anyway, I highly recommend that you follow that guy. All right, next point. A powerful cultural stream has fed this river of political correctness, the curbing of free speech, increased government control, growing racial conflict, and hostility toward Christianity. Leading these attacks against traditional American values is a form of Marxism that is widely taught in many universities and assumed by elitists as the theory that best explains the inequities of our society and our best hope for curing them. And yes, incredible as it may seem, Karl Marx still rules from the grave. Okay? Now again, what's interesting about this, it used to be that if you went to one of the elite schools like Harvard or Stanford or Brown or Princeton or whatever, you would automatically get a job. I mean, people would be clamoring for you because these universities have such great reputations. But what's happened in the last 20, 30 years is with these DEI departments in place, they've lowered the standards such that in many of the schools, they don't even require an SAT score. And so what's happened is the standards, as they've been lowered, the reputations of these schools have also lowered. And so a lot of in Silicon Valley, a lot of these schools they're not automatically hiring you if you got a degree from Stanford now. They're going to schools, they're interviewing students where the standards have not been lowered. And so what's going to happen with a lot of these schools is they're in danger of now, the only thing that's keeping them going is they have so much money that's been granted to them. Many of these schools don't even have to require tuition for the next 100 years. And they can still get students in. However, when companies know that you need somebody to do this and they're not qualified, they don't have the skills for it, why would I hire you? Okay? So it works in education, but what's happening, and here's where we're seeing a turnaround. And so a lot of the DEI stuff, I think it's a fortunate thing that it's biting people, where you don't want to be bit. And so that's the thing about Marxism is it's a great idea, but it really doesn't work. Because what happens is you always elite the largest class, which tends to be the middle class, and then you have a poorer class and you have elites. And this is what we're seeing with Doge, for instance. I mean, Doge is finding this out left and right all over the place, that you have an elite that is stealing money from the masses. And people aren't going to stand for that.
It's fun to watch their heads explode.
Yeah. But this is what's going on at every level. At every level, people are starting to wake up. Not enough, but at least some, and hopefully more. But again, what's happening is we're finding out, we're realizing that if you lower standards, sin rises. And in the message today, I'm going to talk about capital punishment and the role of government. And a lot of people, even Christians, struggle with that. But again, if you're struggling with that, I just want you to know what you're struggling with is you're struggling with what God says. And so a lot of what's in the Bible, our culture doesn't accept it, so then we impose what culture values on the Bible, and we pick and choose. We cherry pick. I like what this passage says, but I don't like this passage. Okay? And so that's why I say be wary of pastors that don't preach through books of the Bible, because the primary reason they're doing that, Rick Warren, he's said, I've heard him say this many times. Rick Warren, who started Saddleback, is considered, one of the most successful pastors in the world. He flat out said, I will not talk about the end times. It's too controversial. And I look at the Great Commission where Jesus says, teach everything that I've commanded you. In other words, teach the whole counsel of God. And here's a pastor saying, well, I'm never going to talk about the end times because it's too controversial. Okay, well, I don't trust, I personally do not trust somebody like that. And I wouldn't sit under somebody like that. See, I have to deal with tough issues because I'm going through verse by verse, line by line through the Bible. And it's like, it doesn't matter what my opinion is. This is what God says, okay? And like it or not, because God says it, and God created us, and God sustains us, and God's the one who establishes the standards, no matter how much you dislike them, they're the standards. There's no higher standard, right? So again, it's crazy to me to think that there's so many pastors and churches and politicians, what have you, out there that basically say, this is obsolete, we've got a better idea. And it never works because it's not a better idea. And it's not based on what God has given. So again, cultural Marxists and Marxism, it's just interesting to see what's happening in different parts of the world. A place where this is really interesting to follow is Argentina. My parents grew up in Argentina. They came to the United States because of Marxism being rampant in Argentina. And such to the point that money was being taken from their bank account to finance the Peronista Party in Argentina in the 1950s. So they left and they came to America. And when they saw what was going on in politics in the late 1990s, they said, we're going to see exactly what happened in Argentina happen in the United States. And unless we have a leader that can counter this movement of Marxism. And so we're very fortunate that Kamala Harris did not get elected. Because if she did, I think we would have gone the exact direction of Argentina. And it took 70 years for them. Now they have a president that's countering Marxism. Why? Because he has a PhD in economics. And he's studied economics around the world and what communist countries and socialist countries have done. They've ruined every country where it's become a part of that. And so just from an economic perspective, it doesn't work. Because what you do is you take away the incentive. If you take away competition, you take away the incentive for people to work. And then you have over 50% of the people in the country dependent on government, and you eliminate the middle class, and eventually you end up going in great debt because who's footing the bills? Okay, and this has happened everywhere. Okay, everywhere. And when you study history, this is what you see. So again, with cultural Marxism, it's not so much an economic thing, although it always is. It always becomes that. But BLM, DEI, you name it pretty much. All these things are related to cultural Marxism. They're a result of there are oppressors and the oppressed, and then the oppressed must must take the place of the oppressors. But then you have vice versa. You've still got the oppressed and the oppressed. It's a vicious cycle, okay? All right, so in the last point there, cultural Marxists seek to capture 5 cultural institutions. And again, we have seen this heavily in the United States. The social institutions, the political institutions, the educational institutions, the religious institutions, and the familial life of a nation. So we've seen every single one of those things be attacked. And they will continue to be attacked, okay? And again, so what God has established, so in our series on Genesis, we're calling this, our series is called Building on God's Foundations. And what Marxism does is destroying God's foundations and creating new ones. And it's like Jesus says in that, the wise man built his house on the rock, the foolish man built his house on the sand. Marxism is building your house on the sand. It can't stand. There's nothing to keep it afloat. All right, go to the next page. In Marxism, the family is perceived as a unit in which wives are suppressed by their husbands and children are suppressed by their parents. And these clusters of oppression have to be broken up. Mothers have to leave their homes and join the workforce. Well, man alive, that's happened in spades in the United States. And again, there's a lot of people that have studied feminism, and feminism's done, it's done some good. Again, women and men are equal, but their roles, according to the scriptures, are distinct. And so if you don't maintain the role distinction, you get into trouble. That's where you get into trouble. And what's happened is we have now children that aren't being educated by their parents anymore. They're being educated by a Marxist system in preschools, public schools, what have you. And so the early Marxists that came to America, people like Marcuse, who taught at University of San Diego and Berkeley, basically they said, we're not going to have a violent overthrow of the government in America, at least not yet. So what we need to do is we need to indoctrinate them through our education system. And that's what they've done. They've done a really good job of that. And it's worked, So as Marx put it, the next bullet point, anybody who knows anything of history knows the great social changes are impossible without the feminine ferment. Social progress can be measured exactly by the social position of the fair sex. Marxists believe one of the benefits of mothers joining the workforce is that their children must then attend state-sponsored daycare centers and schools where they can be taught about the errors of creationism, the church, and of course the Bible. Children can also be indoctrinated about the evils of capitalism and the benefits of socialism and economic equality. For this to become a reality, the education of children has to be taken out of the hands of the parents and surrendered to the state. Next point. Marxism proposes that the government take permanent control of the economy and provide financial security with cradle-to-grave benefits. Healthcare, guaranteed wage and price controls, free college tuition, and assured comfortable retirement are all part of its larger agenda. Marxism proposes a government-planned economy and in the end says that state rights should supplant God-given rights. Women are told they are victims of the past, of social norms, of traditions, and of men. This emphasis on victimhood also applies to race, not with the intention of bringing about reconciliation, but instead to keep the races in conflict with each other. Upheaval with various factions fighting each other is necessary for the larger goal of bringing about a cultural revolution that will destabilize the existing order and usher in a new era of government control and Marxist values. Impossible demands are made to hinder progress in race relations rather than searching for common ground and common sense solutions. Okay, so this is what we constantly see. When you watch the news, when you watch the media, it's constantly you're sexist, you're racist, you're this, you're that. And there's no argument. It's just, if you're opposed to my view, you're a racist. If you're opposed to my view, you're a sexist. If you're opposed to my view. But again, there's no arguments ever given. And they just scream louder. And as I've said before, in sermon prep, when you're a pastor, when you're preparing to be a pastor, they say if you have a weak point, you pound the pulpit and yell. And this is what they do, weak point, just yell louder, so people will hear you. But again, the point is there any content in what they're yelling? Is there any point in what they're saying? And that's the point, okay?
It's pointless.
Yeah. And by the way, I've been to Venezuela and Cuba in recent years, and in both places, I didn't meet a single person. I met a lot of people and talked to a lot of people. And in Cuba, really nice people from really nice families said, if I could get to America and know that I would survive, whether it's swimming there or a maid shift. It's really weird. When you go to Cuba, there's no boats anywhere. You see all these beautiful harbors, and there's no boats because, again, people would be able to, they'd all leave.
They did.
Okay, and they have. But everybody, I didn't talk to a single person in Cuba that says, oh, I just want you to know how great communism is. It's like, man, if I'd do anything to get out of here. And what you experience there, and I got to experience, I waited 2 hours for eggs for our group in a line, and when I got to the front, the eggs were gone. So you spent 2 hours for nothing. And it's because the food they have, in Cuba, you don't have an aisle of a bunch of cereal. You have one cereal that you can get. And it's provided by the government. When they run out, they're out. When I was in Venezuela, there's only one beer in all of it. There's no competition. There's one beer. It's provided by the government. When they run out, they're out. And so what people do, they go to Colombia, they go to the border, and then there's people that are waiting there to carjack you to get your beer and then sell it on the black market. Okay, it's just an absolutely horrible situation. And when you talk to all those people, what has Marx done for you lately? Now, for the elites, it's great. Steal from the people and live like kings. But again, it always eliminates the middle class, it eliminates competition, and it creates tremendous poverty and starvation everywhere. Okay, that's what it does. All right. Which point am I on? The fifth point there? This emphasis?
Please understand.
Oh, please understand that Marx was right in pointing out that oppression exists, often in horrible ways, but his solutions are entirely wrong-headed and destructive. By locating the problem as only the external systemic oppression between classes and by ignoring the biblical doctrine of original sin and individual responsibility, he sent his followers on a path of endless and unresolved conflict. And that's the horrible thing about it. You have this perpetuating hatred that, where everybody's just angry and wants to kill somebody. It creates a horrible way to live. So many people who know nothing about Karl Marx nevertheless advance a Marxist agenda. For example, rather than simply insisting on fairness in policing and weeding out bad cops, the movement seeks to neuter the police force altogether to destabilize the existing social order. They know that anarchy is an important step toward destroying capitalism and Western culture. Obviously, the organization Black Lives Matter does not speak for all black Americans, but after the brutal murder of George Floyd, it has gained widespread national and political support. Those who don't support it are frequently denounced as racist. In reference to Margaret Sanger, and we're going to have that 1916 Project movie on March 1st here about Planned Parenthood. Don't miss what she said. A woman must overcome the evil she has wrought through her submission. In other words, submission to her husband was evil. To stay at home to rear children was servitude. The home would no longer consist of a father, a mother, and children. Liberation meant equality of roles, equality of income, and equality of sexual freedom. The biblical roles of marriage and faith in God were deemed obsolete and harmful. So the Bible teaches that genders are equal in value but different in roles. And the media not only reflects the culture but directs the culture. It is out front and we are expected to follow. Their goal is the total capitulation of the culture to their point of view. Dissenting voices are shamed into either submission or silence. And I really do believe that again, you can disagree with me, but I think if Elon Musk didn't buy Twitter, I don't think Trump would have won the election. I think we finally had some say in media. And fortunately, he ended up buying the thing that has more information gets out through now X than any other media outlet, by far. And the mainstream media, is just tanking. absolutely tanking.
Thank you, Jesus.
And but again, I think the previous elections were won because of the mainstream media. Okay, so again, it's not that people are thinking about these things, researching these things. It's if you listen to the media, whatever media you're listening to, that's going to influence how you vote and how you live. And like it or not, that's just the way it is now. But that's why it is important that the media has multiple views, so that you can check it out for yourself and you can evaluate the different views that are being spoken. Okay, some key scriptures that he talks about related to this 2 Chronicles 20:12. We are powerless against the great horde that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. And that's a good place for all of us to start. You know, that there's always stuff going on, and it's like you feel like you're drinking from a fire hose trying to keep up with how to make a difference in this world. But again, we need to keep our eyes on the Lord. He's sovereign over this, and he's going to work things out. 1 Peter 3:14-17, but even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you, and do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you're slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that be God's will, than for doing evil. And again, we just need to keep trucking. You know, keep trucking, keep doing things God's way, keep praying, keep being a good citizen, treat people with gentleness and respect. But again, don't compromise on the truth either. Speak the truth with grace and love. In Revelation 3:2 to the church in Sardis, he said, strengthen what remains. You know, what remains, what we have, the freedoms we have, let's strengthen it. Jude 3:4, beloved, although I was very eager to write to you about our common salvation, I found it necessary to write appealing to you to contend for the faith that was once for all delivered to the saints. For certain people have crept in unnoticed who long ago were designated for this condemnation, ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God into sensuality and deny our only Master and the Lord Jesus Christ. In other words, contend for the faith means keep getting this doctrine out there. Whether people listen to it or not, just keep planting the seeds. Just keep sharing the truth, living the truth, getting out there. And then I love Joshua 1:8-9, when the people of Israel enter the promised land. The book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. Have I not commanded you, be strong and courageous? Do not be frightened, and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Okay, before we go to chapter 2, any questions or comments on the first chapter?
I think that, especially that last quote, just encourages us to stay in the Word.
Mm-hmm.
Stay in the Word. Go to Bible study fellowship if you have to, but stay in the Word.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And again, I mean, every time we open up the Bible, I was saying this yesterday in systematic theology class, that I feel like I need to be cleansed constantly based on the exposure to the world. The language they use, the subjects that are being taught, I mean, they're just, you know, it's almost unfathomable that any of this stuff is public, but it is. And so we constantly need to be cleansed by the reading of the Word, reminded of what is important, reminded of what's true, and be encouraged by the Word. Okay, chapter 2, the title of it was Rewrite the Past to Control the Future. Now, this is a big deal in America. Again, I don't know if you know this, but the most widely read history book in America is by Howard Zinn, who was he was not just a Marxist. He was heavily involved in trying to promote communism in the public schools. So that is the most used history textbook in America, his book. And
Starts in junior high, right?
and so when you wonder why is racism being ramped up, You know, why are these things ramped up? Because he believed, what he teaches in his book is that the founding fathers, they founded this basically to condone and promote slavery. And that's what America's all about. It's about slavery. It's interesting that he never writes about who abolished slavery. Okay, and it's hate the white person. Whiteness is bad. It's horrible. It's terrible. And until whiteness is destroyed, we're not going anywhere. So that's what people are being taught. But again, it doesn't mean, just a second, it doesn't mean that everything in our history is good. And that everybody, I mean, again, if you wrote a biography on me, you'd find out bad things. If I wrote a biography on you, people would find out bad things. We're sinners. I mean, we all need Jesus. Not that we're perfect, but from biography, you learn the good and the bad, and from people's lives, you learn the good and the bad, and it doesn't promote the bad. It just says, hey, I don't want to do what this person did. Oftentimes, the bad teaches you how not to live, how not to behave. But who liberated slavery in England? William Wilberforce, a Christian. Who liberated slavery in America? Abraham Lincoln. I mean, if you didn't have two white guys liberating slavery, we'd still have slavery, okay? So again, it's like, yeah, do we condone it? No. Was it bad? Yes. But we did something about it, okay? And again, it's just, I don't know. You don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, okay? Hardly anybody wants to go to cities in America now because they have tied the hands of the police. And so that's why it's so dangerous to go into cities. And they're just allowing mobs to do whatever they want to do. Rape people, destroy property, steal, you know. And you have a disaster on your hands. And who has to pay for all that? The taxpayers, right? All right, so rewriting the past to control the future is a huge strategy in Marxism. And this is what they've been doing in America for many years now. So George Orwell said, "Who controls the past controls the future," when he described the totalitarian state. Orwell, who wrote during the rise of communism, pointed out that if you can rewrite or even erase the past, you can help people forget who they are and forge a new future. Revising history lies at the heart of all social and political revolutions. The point to be made is that when revolutionaries want to remake a country, they vilify the past to give legitimacy to the vision of the future. And this is why I believe heavily in homeschooling and Christian education, because if kids go to public school today, you're not getting real history. You're getting revisionist history that's not even true by a bunch of communists. And that's just true. That's reality. That's the way it is. And the same thing, you know, in science, you're getting evolution. That's the only game in town. You're not going to hear any alternative. Not even intelligent design can be taught in the public system. So what you've done, you've eliminated God, you've eliminated his standards, you've eliminated his values, and in its place, atheism is the driving force in the worldview that's being taught. Okay, so we really have to articulate this. We have to talk about it. You can't learn enough about this because it's just out there in spades. Okay, all right. Second point there, they're using racism to attack America at its core. It's not about making America better. It's about destroying the past to build America on an entirely different foundation. Milan Kundera, a well-known Czech writer and historian who opposed the Soviet takeover of Czechoslovakia in 1968 and author of the book The Velvet Revolution of 1989, wrote about a conversation he had with a friend. He writes, "My all but blind friend, Milan Hubel, came to visit me one day in 1971 in my tiny apartment on Bartola Majeska Street." I probably butchered that. "We looked out the window at the spires of the castle and were sad. The first step in liquidating a people," said Hubel, "is to erase its memory, destroy its books, its culture, its history, then have somebody write new books, manufacture a new culture, invent a new history. Before long, the nation will begin to forget what it is and what it was." and exactly what's happened in the United States. The secular radicals have a goal: deny us the knowledge of who we are, thus destroying the principles upon which this nation was built. The strategy is to accentuate America's crimes and sins, destroy the reputations of her heroes, and use our history to divide us rather than to teach and unite us. Above all, ignore the fact that the United States has achieved the greatest civilization in history and is the envy of the world. Just ask where most migrants wish to go, and some will mention some Western European nations, but for the majority, America tops the list. If your children return from schooling hating America, the reason could be due to reading textbooks like A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, an avowed Marxist who believes America was founded in tyranny and for profit. The editor of the 1619 Project, Nicole Hannah-Jones, wrote an essay back in 1995 in which she said, by the way, that 1619 Project is the most used book in American education today.
Still?
Yes. Yeah. So she said this, that the white race is the biggest murderer, rapist, pillager, and thief of the modern world. Can you imagine? This is what kids are being taught, okay? The white race is comprised of barbaric devils, bloodsuckers, and Columbus was no different than Hitler. Clearly, the project she oversaw was intended to reflect her views. Okay. All right, page 5. By the way, if you're watching on video, this outline is there for you in the description. Page 5. Yes, absolutely, there is more that we can do, but we must do it together, not by vilifying our founding fathers, but by learning from them, separating the good from the bad, and learning how we can do better. We forget, as Pat Buchanan has pointed out, that the West did not invent slavery. The West ended slavery. Okay, good point. The 1619 Project is a targeted effort intended to show that the United States is to be hated because it's a racist and capitalistic nation whose roots must be destroyed and rebuilt upon a cultural Marxist foundation that will bring equality and justice to all. Don't lose sight of the radicals' goal to delegitimize the founding fathers and America's Judeo-Christian heritage. And for that matter, delegitimize all of Western history and condemn those who brought us the civilization we enjoy today. In the eyes of the radical secularists, America has systemic racial, economic, and political disparities that only cultural Marxism can solve. To build America on a better foundation, religion must be replaced with humanistic values. After all, they say, religion, particularly Christianity, is used as an instrument of oppression and social control, and white privilege is said to be the source of our systemic ills. To overcome these obstacles to globalism, the humanists push for what amounts to open borders, because even the concept of national citizenship must be erased. To have a secure, controlled border is not conducive for developing a world community. That's why humanists long for a borderless world. The second benefit of uncontrolled immigration is that millions of people will end up being government dependent, a great boon for those who strive toward a socialist state. So let me paraphrase Arthur Schlesinger's comment that if a person loses his memory, he does not know who he is. When a nation loses its history, it becomes whatever people say it is. And usually the loudest and most angry voices win. Okay, so that's where we are.
We did see every
Yeah.
this, it's just so
Yeah. All right, any comments on any of this and what we've read or talked about so far? Again, I mean, this is front and center every day. It's in the news every day. Everything is either coming from a Judeo-Christian worldview or a Marxist worldview. There's not too much in between those two things right now. Yeah. Joanne, yeah.
When I was junior in high school, I was taking a history course, and we found out that the communist Russians had decided that they were going to have all the women join the workforce, and they were going to put the children in daycare. And I remember talking to my friends and saying, those wily wily Russians, they'll stop at nothing, you know. It's inconceivable that mothers would leave their children with strangers or whatever and go off.
Mm-hmm.
And so fast forward about 15 years, and the church I was in decided that to assist mothers, they would start a daycare in their church.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, well, what's the difference between what we're doing and what the Russians, the wily Russians, were doing? But
Yeah.
it's the frog in the kettle that's slowly
Yeah.
thinking that we're helping mothers instead of helping them financially or with resources. We're giving them, we're buying into the, you know, what the state is saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, if you look at just the proof of where we're at as a culture, you know, the suicide rates are just skyrocketing among young people. You know, it's a horrible thing to not be raised by your parents. And most parents aren't raising their kids anymore. And the statistics are just overwhelming of how much a baby needs to be held and nurtured. I mean, God created the family. One of the main institutions, the family. Be fruitful and multiply. And God loves the family, and our culture hates the family and hates children. The only children they like are the ones they can control within the system. But they don't want anybody raising children unless they're telling them what their ideology is, which is anti-Christian, it's anti-biblical. And that's where we're at. That's why we're so polarized, because it's opposite things. It's opposite designs. Jody, you had a comment?
I'm just wondering if you have a referral to an easy read for high schoolers that get the 1916 project and don't have a lot of spare time. Is there an easy, kid-friendly read to help them know the truth?
I'd have to think about that. Nothing comes to mind other than, what's the name of that guy? The guy that does a lot of history stuff, Dana. You've listened to him on podcasts and stuff.
Several.
Maybe you could write one.
Who comes to mind for you?
What comes to mind was probably Hillsdale College has a
Yeah,
textbook that has the world history. They have a DVD that comes with it.
Okay.
And a whole text syllabus that comes with it.
Yeah.
And you could do that online or actually purchase the book itself.
But for kids who weren't homeschooled, they're not going to read another textbook. So I
Right.
wonder if
Yeah.
they're...
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the DVD and the online training, because that's the audience they're catering to
Yeah.
is high school and early college.
Yeah.
When you're competing with the world, and
Right.
entertainment and the gaming and all the rest that teens do,
Right.
we need a resource that's simpler, clearer, powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there are good alternatives. Because I'm so far removed from that, I don't know, but I can ask, because our daughters homeschool, and you know, that they're using materials. There's definitely good materials out there, but again, you typically have to do a little bit of research. But I find that like if you called Hillsdale and asked them, they would have somebody to point you to.
Actually, they're working to do a K through 12
Are they?
right now.
Okay, that's great. Yeah.
And they've actually infused their curriculum. I think they're up to 12 states or 14 states
Okay.
in the United States.
That's great.
No, not California.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're actually affecting
Yeah.
grammar schools and stuff.
Yeah.
The
No, that's great.
Reality being that so many Christian parents are not homeschooling their kids.
Right.
So I think they need a resource.
Yeah.
I'm sure there is one, but I don't know what it is.
And Hillsdale is just such a great model for Christians, because what good schools do is they do double study. You study what the world's studying,
Yeah.
and you study the Christian world, and you compare the two, and you dialogue and you debate it. So that Victor Davis Hanson was saying this. He's saying that conservative students in America are the smartest students, because they're bombarded every day with liberal thinking, and they have to defend their position. And the thing is, the liberals don't have to defend it. It's just it's their home field advantage. It's like we're all together in this, but they can't say why, and they can't defend it. It's just this is what everybody believes. But when you're a Christian, you have to defend it. It is, yeah, it is. So what they're like you listen to Charlie Kirk. That's a homeschooled guy. Okay, he's as smart as anybody out there. I mean, smarter. But again, this is a homeschool product. But Hillsdale College is producing just incredible people that are influencing public policy and law and history and all that kind of stuff. And they have a huge waiting list, to get in.
I have a question.
Yeah.
This is more for your opinion and approach. Do you feel the pendulum is starting to swing the other way? I mean, with a lot of businesses are getting rid of the DEI. This critical race theory has found a dead end. And
I think when you look at the voting map of the United States, and you've probably all seen this, it's. I mean, I don't know what percentage of red it is. If you just look at, again, the popular vote is overwhelmingly red. Even in California. Yes. You look at California, and many counties have turned red. And if you had voter ID, I mean, my opinion is if you had voter ID, I think it would have been a sweep across the country. But that's the problem is they still have a stronghold in places of influence. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of liberal judges that are Marxist. There's a tremendous amount of politicians, a tremendous amount of teachers. The teachers union, the Department of Education, all these things that Doge is evaluating, we're seeing that how much money they contributed to this all over the world.
I'm also thinking from a family standpoint.
Right.
I mean, granted, 2020 wasn't our favorite year, but it brought to mind what was happening in the classroom.
Yeah.
So a lot more parents are getting involved.
Yeah. And here's, to answer your question simply, I think that there are actually more people that believe the way we're talking about in the United States.
Right.
I think by far. However, we've been silenced. What we're seeing is people are now emboldened because we have Elon Musk. We have these different people. We have spokespeople now that are in the public eye that have conservative values, where for so long that's been canceled, that's been quelled. There's been no medium other than underground, And so like a lot of young people today, you poll young people, I mean, I think young people under 30, I saw a poll the other day that young people under 30, 90% of them believe that transgender should not participate in women's sports. 90%. That's huge. Okay, even with all the indoctrination, all the pushing, all of that, the majority are saying, but now they're emboldened to say that.
Yeah, but they're seeing their friends getting beat up on the field.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I do think the tide has changed because it's now there's platforms that are out there that have been shut down and closed for so long. However, like in the public schools, again, over 90% of all the teachers in public schools are, they're almost radical in their Marxism. And so that we got a long ways to go in that. But what's happened is, if we allow school choice, if we allow competition, okay, and that's what we need to do. As long as they control the narrative, it's pretty hard to get any other narrative in there. But what's happened, a lot of people have taken matters into their own hands, and as long as that's protected and there's a free market for education, I think we can see the tide turned. But it's not going to be without a big fight for sure. Yeah.
What's helped me understand some of this is I'm reading a book called The Indoctrinated Brain. And it's written by Neville, and as far as recommending it, that's all I could recommend. It's a great book to help. It's really complicated when it says, bio-neurological chemistry, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
But it does help explain why people are sheeple, yeah, exactly. People think as they do, and why you can't dialogue with other people.
Right.
It's been so ingrained. And so
Yeah. Well, and what you have is you have a whole generation, actually the last 2 generations, that they haven't been taught how to think. People don't reason. They're not taught logic. They're not taught philosophy. So they have a short attention span because everything's media driven. And so there's tons of books coming out right now. And again, that's why the media has won the last several elections, because people aren't reading, they're not thinking, they're not interacting. It's just whatever you're exposed to. And, oh, this person makes me feel good. Or, again, if you're handsome or pretty, that sometimes is just going to get you the job. It's because of the way you look on TV. But again, we used to be a people that it was the substance, it was the content, it was the character. But I think people are starting to see now that those things do matter. They really do matter. And hopefully we get back to some of that. Yeah.
I think too what you're doing is really important because every one of us has contact with family, friends, work co-workers, and just having this and then having the love of Christ to do kind of what you're saying, where you're not like in their face, I'm right, you're wrong.
Right.
But you're just sharing facts, and they may get upset at you, but I've had a couple friends that were very liberal from just a relationship that I had with them are now listening, where they didn't want to listen before.
Yeah.
And we all have that, multiple people that come into our lives every day, so I think this is really important to also have the answers to share with them.
Yeah. And again, I mean, there's a lot of pastors that won't talk about this. But again, this is the world we're living in. We have to deal with this, like you're saying, our friends, family, all these people are exposed to this. But again, you hope that you can maintain a dialogue, because some people won't. Some people are just set in their ways. They don't want to hear it. They cancel you. Like, you disagree with me on this one issue and we have nothing. You're dead to me. Well, there's nothing you can do with somebody like that.
But you have the light of Christ.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the big thing.
Yeah. And I think we have the opportunity to not respond in like way. Try to keep the door open as you can. But again, the reality is I have people that will not interact. I've been canceled by them because of certain views I have. And instead of dialogue, but again, fortunately, I have other people, like you're saying, that you dialogue with and you start seeing, wow, I never thought of that before. That's a good point. Well, that's great, because now you're just moving them this way. So, yeah, it's good. But again, I think it's a mistake to just not deal with this stuff, because we have to live in it. And these are the people we're trying to reach, and we're trying to make a difference in society.
So David, I feel like I need to know how to counter it, because I agree with everything here, but I don't have someone from the other side here sitting with me reading this. I have contacts with my grandkids who are high school and junior high and their friends.
Yeah.
And I've heard the whites are the colonists. So then I counter with, well, the Dutch were, the French were, the Australians are kicking in there too. So was it the Spanish were colonizers? So I said to my grandkids, everybody because of sin.
Yeah.
We're all colonizers. So
Right.
you wanted to say how bad white people are. Dude, we're all bad.
Yeah. And again, that's the thing, is knowing the Bible, knowing theology, allows you to say what you said. It's just, I like a lot of what's going on right now in politics. I like the trade, but there's stuff that's being done that I disagree with too. But I don't throw it. I don't just say, "Oh man, I can't believe." It's like I expect that mistakes are going to be made. I expect that there's going to be decisions that are made in the flesh, and it's just reality. But again, I look at what are the alternatives, And what's the best thing here, and how can I make a difference here as well? You know, how can I participate in this? But I think with our grandkids, or especially grandkids, children who are exposed to all this stuff, well, all we can do is expose them to as much truth as we can, and be able to allow them to talk out what they're thinking without lambasting them. You know, because again, they're saturated in this stuff. But to listen to them and say, "That's interesting. Let me ask you to just consider this." And again, not do it in a dogmatic way. That's stupid. You know, here's the truth. No, but to say, "Have you considered this?" Or "What do you think about this alternative view?"
Yes.
You know, and that's really all we can do, you know, and we can't force them to believe what we believe, but can we make a compelling case for it and be able to dialogue about that? Yeah.
What's clear to me is the growth of liberalism. I mean, you had Margaret Sanger, the Puritan, moves on up into same-sex marriage, on into what it is now, where transgender changing younger children into a different sex. I mean, some of this stuff is so far out, it's obvious.
Yeah.
And, you know...
Well, it's not, but again, unfortunately, it's not obvious to some.
Well,
yeah.
To us it is. And
yeah.
I would think that a normal person would be able to see that.
Well, you're preaching to the choir here. But yeah, you know, again, it's important to understand, you know, like I've had to deal with pretty much everything. All kinds of people that disagree with me and are very much on an opposite page. And again, in a public setting like this, I'm going to declare the truth. But if I'm talking one-on-one with her, I'm really trying to get at, hey, I view anybody, any human, as they've been made in the image of God. Yeah. And then I think, they don't know what I know. The reason they believe this, they don't know what or maybe they know a little bit, or they have a different idea of what I believe. Like even people who say, I don't believe there's a God. Okay, well, my thing immediately is to say, can you tell me about the God you don't believe in? And then when they tell me, I go, I don't believe in that God either. But would you be interested in hearing what God is really like according to the Bible? Where he's revealed his character and nature and where he's acted in history. Would you be interested in hearing about that? And so again, a lot of it's just realizing that a lot of people are either they're ignorant or they've never heard an opposing view or an alternative view or whatever, but doing it in a way that's a dialogue fashion where you really, and again, you have to say, if I was in this person's shoes, how would I want to hear the truth? And sometimes we don't know. We need to ask God for wisdom, and we don't know how to do it at the time. But that's why we study stuff like this, is so we can be prepared when those opportunities come. Okay? All right, well, let me go ahead and close with the scriptures that I had there, and then we'll have a little bit of time of prayer. But on bottom of page 5, just a few scriptures there. Psalm 11, 3-7, if the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see, his eyelids test the children of man. The Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the wicked and the one who loves violence. Let him rain coals on the wicked. Fire and sulfur and a scorching wind shall be the portion of their cup. For the Lord is righteous. He loves righteous deeds, and the upright shall behold his face. And this is a really encouraging word to us. And then Jesus to the church in Ephesus in Revelation 2, 3-5. I know you're enduring patiently and bearing up for my name's sake, and you have not grown weary. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen, repent, and do the works you did at first. If not, I will come to you and remove your lampstand from its place, unless you repent. And again, just a powerful word to us as a church. You know, let's not lose our first love. Let's not let's not get anything get in the way of our relationship with the Lord and that people also need to have a relationship with the Lord, and we need to be involved in evangelism and be patient with people and loving as God has been with us. And then Corrie ten Boom, I love his quote from her. The wonderful thing about praying is that you leave a world of not being able to do something and enter God's realm where everything is possible. What a great saying.